You are listening to Supplement Source, the official podcast of the Council for Responsible Nutrition. And now your host, Jeff Ventura.
Okay, I'm here today with Andrew Shao,
who is the Senior Vice President, Global Scientific and Regulatory Affairs at Niagen Bioscience.
Andrew, thank you so much for coming to Supplement Source. Again, I think this is your second time on our little show.
I believe so, yes.
Yeah. Well, we appreciate it, of course. And I've got some, I think, great questions, if I do say so myself, to ask you today. Kick off our discussion about NR. Kind of just go over the basics, because I think people they get confused. And there's NR, there's NAD plus, there's NMN.
Right.
Walk me through that. What are the differences? To the uninitiated, It's a lot of acronyms.
Yes, and we live in a world of acronyms in Washington, D.C., of course, and in the scientific community. So let's explain it to you. So I think anyone who's had basic biochemistry course, you think back from years ago, you remember a molecule called nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide, or NAD. You just mentioned it very briefly, NAD plus. That's really the magic molecule. It's an essential coenzyme that exists in every cell in our body and is involved in hundreds of reactions as a coenzyme, which means it's helping other enzymes do their job. And it's something that our cells endogenously, meaning they naturally produce on their own, an intracellular coenzyme. It just turns out that it's critical for all these different functions. And what we've learned over many years of research, that the levels of NAD in cells declines as we age and as we expose ourselves to what we call metabolic stressors. Stresses that we put ourselves through that cause damage to our cells. So if you think about a stressor like too much alcohol, maybe a very high fat, high sugar diet, too much sun exposure, right?
The reason that you went for alcohol first must be, it has to be because it's me interviewing you.
Of course, I'm going in the order of exposure. Right?
Okay.
Most to least exposure. But these are all things that actually we find ourselves putting ourselves through every day for years and years and years. But it turns out these things cause a lot of damage. Smoking would be another one, pollution and so forth. These are all stressors that cause damage. NAD is critical in the repair process in two areas. One is helping to generate energy, which is what you learn from biochemistry class, right? Turning our nutrients into ATP. But the other one is repair. And when we damage our cells, when we damage our tissues through exposure to these stressors, it consumes NAD. It uses it up as part of the repair process. And the more we expose ourselves to these things, and the combination with aging, now we have depletion of NAD. And that's where supplementation potentially plays a very, very important role to maintain those levels. Now, from a lifestyle standpoint, you can do things like regular moderate exercise, or you can calorie restrict, right? Intermittent fasting. These are actually lifestyle approaches to keeping your NAD levels up. But the most effective ways are to use supplementation. Supplementation with what? You've mentioned a bunch of acronyms. NR, NMN, NAD. Okay, NAD is the coenzyme. It is an intracellular coenzyme. It's produced inside cells. The only way your cells produce it is by taking up what we call NAD precursors. And they turn those precursors into NAD. And that's what NR, nicotinamide riboside, is an NAD precursor.
There's been some debate, hasn't there, about bioavailability. Can you talk to me a little bit about that? How consistent is the human data on bioavailability?
Well, I guess it depends on what molecule you're supplementing with, what product, what compound. When it comes to precursors like NR, and there's other ones, nicotinic acid, nicotinamide, these are other ones that are commonly known and available. They have some drawbacks. Nicotinic acid causes flushing. Oh. It's an uncomfortable side effect at relatively low doses, causes flushing, which is a redness and inflammation of the skin. So
much like drinking.
In some people, yes, a very similar effect where some people are very prone to a flushing effect and when they've consumed alcohol. That's an interesting observation. Not everybody though, and by the way, the flushing effect of nicotinic acid or niacin also affects different people differently as well. So, but these are all easily taken up by cells. So supplemented orally, absorbed by the intestine, taken up by cells, converted into NAD. NAD itself is a big molecule with charged phosphates on it. It cannot cross the cell membrane. It is not an extracellular coenzyme. It is intracellular.
I'm assuming that you're going to tell me that there is a lot of compelling clinical findings to date around NR supplementation, that we do know that it can reliably, we know what it can do, in humans reliably.
So you read my mind.
Yeah.
Because for NR, there are some peer-reviewed clinical studies demonstrating its safety and efficacy in all sorts of different populations. A number of these are showing how NR boosts NAD in the blood, boosts NAD in other tissues like the brain, for example. And the brain is one of the most, metabolically demanding tissues. Those are tissues that really consume a lot of NAD, both for energy production, but also for DNA and cell damage repair.
Yeah. So when we talk about boosting of levels versus promising clinical signals, can you walk me through the difference there? If you were to manage expectations based on the universe of what we know versus what we don't, what would be some of the caveats? I mean, obviously, with this is an emerging area still. Can we talk about the unknowns?
Yes. Well, first, I think the first part of your question is more along the lines of kind of clinical relevance. What actual outcomes? Because I'm talking about NAD levels, which are like a biomarker. What are actual outcomes? And one very consistent outcome that I think would resonate with consumers, with practitioners, is inflammation. Mm-hmm. One of the hallmarks of aging is what we call inflammaging. We all know it to be this sort of chronic condition. It can be linked to specific diseases, but it's more of an age-related phenomenon of being more inflamed as we age and as we expose ourselves to more of those stressors I was telling you about. Some of the other things that have been studied, albeit we've taken them from disease conditions, right? So one way to really understand how a molecule is working is to study it in an extreme condition where NAD metabolism is extremely disrupted. As I'd mentioned before, the brain and nerves are very metabolically active. They're heavily NAD dependent.
This seems like an interesting marketing challenge. Not a hard sell, but a unique one. With pharmaceuticals and many supplements, people often expect immediate results, right? But with something like NR, the benefits happen at the cellular level, which likely requires consistent, long-term use. Am I understanding that right? Can you speak a little to that?
The benefit of boosting NAD is twofold, really. One is helping with energy production. The other is with repair, cellular and DNA repair. The latter is the one that takes a little bit longer to manifest itself in terms of functional benefit. Maybe to improve walking time on a treadmill, it's months in combined with exercise, right? So, but more acutely, one of the things that we've observed is an increase in energy levels, but in a different way than what you get from drinking a cup of coffee, which is very, very acute and short-lived, short-term. Yeah. This is something that manifests itself over a few weeks of feeling a boost in energy as a result of taking.
It's the tortoise and the hare kind of notion.
And I did want to touch briefly on what it is we don't know. You did ask that question. I think that science is always evolving. There's always new questions to ask and answer. But one of the things that we don't know is what is optimal NAD levels. What's optimal? And that's something we don't know because we haven't studied the general population. If you think about vitamin D as an analogy, all the research that was poured into vitamin D over about a 2-decade period to answer all of these questions about what is optimal and where's the population at relative to that, or what is deficient, where are they relative to that, and what interventions do we need to get people to this optimal level or to a sufficient level. That takes a tremendous amount of population-based research. And that hasn't been done, although I envisioned it starting to happen here with NAD in a very similar way that it did with vitamin D, 2 decades ago.
Do you think that NR kind of being lumped into the sort of longevity and anti-aging category, that helps or hurts the science in your view?
That's a great question. I think it's a combination of both. This is what I would say. Because, look, the more interest, the more eyeballs, particularly from practitioners, from researchers, even influencers, the more science investment happens, right? And if talking about longevity and anti-aging gets more science to be invested in and questions to be answered, tested, and so forth, then I think that's a good thing overall. However, we do have a situation where the cart is out in front of the horse in a lot of cases where, claims of reversing aging, for example, are just simply, I don't know that it's even feasible, but certainly the data are not there when it comes to various molecules.
There was
and NAD is one of them. But
there was a headline the other day that said, I forget who did it, but it said Brian Johnson, right? That's the It said Brian Johnson is going to die. Which I
eventually.
Yeah, right. It's sort of like, yes. We can still say that as a truism, right?
Yes. Yeah. So that's where the double-edged sword is. It's maybe it can get to a point where it's misleading consumers, but if it's generating interest where that prompts the investment in science, I think that's overall a good thing.
To say the least, a fascinating discussion. Andrew Shao, we really do appreciate you coming on to fill in some of the blanks, certainly for me. And I'm sort of in this space, so to speak, and I still sometimes have to kind of check myself in terms of the definitions of all of these things. So I really do appreciate the insight into the science, and do hope that you will come back onto the Supplement Source.
My pleasure, Jeff. Thank you so much.
Have a great day.
All right. Bye.